So hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the Speedy's Garage YouTube channel. Today we're going to be doing a little bit of testing, and if you guys have followed the channel for a while, you know I'm a ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure kind of guy. So I really don't like to wing it too much, especially when I'm trying to do something that's going to help me at the track with racing. So I see some of the YouTube videos out there where they spend a lot of time and effort getting somewhere, and then they get to an event or whatever, and then they make one pass, or the car has a problem coming off the trailer. I've seen it at Challenger Fest a couple of times. I've actually got a rule personally that I don't make any major changes to Go Man Go 30 days from an event, and that way I know everything's stable, everything's like it needs to be. And I get it, not everybody's like that. Some people are literally making changes to their car the night before an event and kind of fly by the seat of their pants when they get there, and that's their thing. It's not mine, so I like to plan a little bit more. So leading up to the track, you guys have been following along, know I've been playing around with flex fuel tuning, and I'm able to run 93 octane all the way up to full E85. These Hellcats, they love timing, but you're limited by fuel in most cases because from the factory, they're already almost maxing out what you can do on pump gas. Pump gas is only going to be worth maybe 800 to the wheel, and then you start getting on the edge, even good 93 octane, you start getting on the edge of what that fuel can support. And so you need a better fuel if you're going to go past that. It's usually not, people say, well, how much boost do you run? Or, how much, this or that can you do? And it's really a limit of the fuel and how much horsepower you're actually going to make at the end of the day. And so E85 has such a wide tuning window. It's about 100 octane, maybe 105, but it's spraying 30% more fuel volume, as I've mentioned before. So it's cooling everything down. It's not prone to detonation, actually resists detonation quite well. And so you can make a whole lot more power with E85. So my plan would be to run my flex fuel tune. I'm getting ready to drive to Beach Bend. Let's say it's 90 miles. I can put a little bit of 93 in the tank and get the better gas mileage, because that E85 30% more fuel volume, the compromise to that is you're only going to get, at least in my car, I'm only getting like 10 miles per gallon cruising around. So if I'm on the highway cruising to Bowling Green, which is about a 90 mile drive, I'm only going to get maybe 11 or 12 miles per gallon all the way up there if I'm on full E85. If I start mixing in some 93 on my flex fuel tune, I can get better mileage to get up there, and I'll time it just right so that it's almost empty. And then when I get to Beach Bend or close, I can put E85 in the tank. And my plan is to run a full E85 tune at the track. That way I'm not guessing if it's calculating the E85 correctly or anything of that nature. I can be a little bit more deliberate, I'll say, about the actual tune that's in the car and how it's going to work, from fueling and timing and all of that good stuff. So we've got our Renegade race fuel, racing E85. I know you can get it from the pump, but I wanted to know I had good fuel in the tank when I'm at the track. So that's what I picked up. That's what I'm going to run in Go Man Go for the full-on E85 race tune. We're going to check into this stuff, see what it's all about. So for probably the past maybe 2 weeks, I have been working on a straight E85 tune for the car. Had flex fuel working pretty well. I wanted to get a straight E85 tune working so that I knew I could do this at the track, swap to the E85 tune. And I'm basically doing that to reduce the number of variables that could be changing something in the tune. I don't really want to run a flex fuel tune at the track. I just want to run a straight, either race gas if I'm running RM109, Renegade's RM109 unleaded gasoline, or their Pro E85 race E85 product. I want to know the tune is just set up specifically for that fuel and I don't have to worry about it doing any kind of calculations or anything else. Working on that E85 tune wasn't too bad. There's a couple of ways you can set them up, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It has to do with how the car displays what fuel is in it on the dash. These Hellcats have an air-fuel ratio gauge. It's interesting, they call it air-fuel ratio on the dash, but the symbol in between the little logo is actually lambda, and I'll talk more about that too. But for now, got a full straight up E85 tune in the car. I've been running pump gas E85 for a couple of weeks to make sure it all works like it should, and it is. So what I'm really curious about is now if I put the Renegade Pro E85 in the car, does it work the exact same as the pump gas? I want to know it does, and if there's any tune changes that I need to make for this fuel, I want to go ahead and have that ready to go rather than finding out when I get to the track that there's something different about it than pump gas E85 that affects the car. And the biggest way you're going to be able to tell that, I believe, is through the fuel trims. So these cars are what they call wideband all the time. They've got sensors in the exhaust that read fueling and give a feedback to the computer. You can log all of that in HP Tuners, and I know what it's reading on the pump gas E85. I'm very curious what it's going to read on this Renegade Pro E85. Hopefully they just line right up and I don't have to really make any changes and I'll be good to go, but we're going to find out. The first thing I'm really curious about is how this will measure in our beaker. You guys have seen me do this before. So I'm going to take a quick measurement of this fuel. I expect it'll just read E85 in that beaker, but I am going to take a sample of it and take a look. So let's see what it says. Yep, it smells like moonshine. Definitely smells like E85. I've got the little beaker. I think you guys have seen me do this before, but basically it has a mark on it where you fill it up with, I'm using distilled water. I'm gonna go straight to that line. There we go. And then I'm gonna use a little, I don't know if these things called, Miss Speedy could tell me, but I'm gonna use this to draw out some of the E85 and fill the rest of it up to the top line. There we go. It's orange in color, Renegade's E85, and it says that in the description, so wasn't surprised there. And we're just going to mix it with the water, shake it up, and we'll see what it comes out to. That looks dead even E85 to me. Pretty cool how the orange stayed on top too. All right, not that I expected anything different, but there you go. Now we know for sure. All right, now I'm just gonna put this Renegade E85 in the tank and I've run it down to almost empty of pump E85. It maybe has a gallon in it. I just barely made it back to the shop. So I'm gonna put this 5 gallons in there and then we'll do our test. Okay, got the data log running, and what I'm going to be monitoring are these fuel trims. I want to make sure that they stay pretty much the same as they did or don't change a whole lot than what they were with the pump gas E85. So we're just going to go for a little drive, check things out. And while I go for this test drive, I'm going to go back to something I mentioned at the beginning of the video, and that's how you can set these tunes up. So some tuners, when they switch you to a fuel other than gasoline, I guess I should say, we'll use E85 as this example, but the same could be true for methanol or even LPG if you had a vehicle that ran on that. Each fuel has its own specific stoic point, and stoic is short for stoichiometry, and in terms of fuel, it's the point at which you get the most complete combustion of that particular fuel. So that means all of it's burning. You don't have any fuel left over and you don't have any air left over. So as you know, an engine, it's going to ingest fuel, but it needs air to go with it to make that bang happen. That's how you get your power. And when you're at a stoichiometric point, or stoic is what everybody calls it, that is the most efficient mixture so that everything burns up. So I need to make that clear. The challenge is gasoline, like you get out of the gas pump, regular old gasoline, has a stoic point of 14.7 to 1. And the way you read that is it's 14.7 parts of air to 1 part of fuel. It's a ratio. And when you have that specific ratio, you're getting 100% or as close to 100% combustion as you can get. You don't get a bunch of leftover fuel or leftover air. So that's the perfect combustion point. E85 has a different stoic point. It's 9.85 to 1, so quite a bit different than what you would get, almost 30% different than gasoline. What that means is when you look at your air-fuel ratio gauge on the dash of your Hellcat or other car that might happen to have an air-fuel ratio gauge installed, if it doesn't understand that now there's a different fuel in the car, the gauge won't read stoic for that fuel, or it won't read the correct air-fuel ratio period. So the Hellcat shows you the air-fuel ratio when you're cruising, when you're at idle, when you're at wide open throttle, and that air-fuel ratio will not be correctly displayed, or the value won't be right unless you've told the tune and the car that, hey, I'm not running gasoline anymore. And you can actually program it in these Hellcats. Not all tuners do that, and I don't know if it's because they don't want to confuse people. You know, everybody, a stock Hellcat, when you're riding around, it's going to read around 13.5 is what you're going to see on that air-fuel ratio gauge, and maybe they don't want to change it because they don't want customers to not understand what they're seeing, and then they see it say 9.5 or 9.7 when they have E85 in the tank, and they start wondering if something's wrong. So you don't have to change it. In my particular situation, I chose to make that change to my tune for a couple of reasons. Number one, I feel like that's how the factory probably would have done it. If they programmed it to run 13.5 when there's gasoline in the tank, and you may say, well, a minute ago you said Stoic was 14.7. Well, that's correct, but for whatever reason, the SRT engineers chose to program Stoic for these cars to be 13.5. It's actually 0.0722 in the tune. And what you do is you divide 1 by that number, and that'll give you the air-fuel ratio. So if you actually do the math, it should be 13.85 is what the factory Hellcat is programmed to from a Stoic point for gasoline. And the theory is that they did that to account for the 10% ethanol that's in a lot of the regular pump gas these days. Now let's go back to E85. Well, E85 is a 9.85 to 1 Stoic point. So that's 0.1015 in the tune. Divide that by 1, or divide 1 by that number, I should say. So 1 divided by 0.1015, you're going to get a 9.85 air-fuel ratio. You have to change about 10 or 12 different values in the tune to make all of that work. The other way, there's nothing wrong with it. It just means that the car is not reading the right air-fuel ratio on the gauge. And again, I think Dodge, if they had made this car to run on E85 from the factory, this is probably how they would have done it. That's the first reason I did it. Number two, when I'm running race gas sometimes, or I'm running full E85 sometimes, or I'm running flex fuel most of the time, I want to be able to know what fuel is in the car by what the dash tells me. So if I'm running gasoline, I know I'm going to be seeing 13.5, 13.7, somewhere like that. If I'm running full E85, I know I'm going to see 9.5, 9.7, and this is all cruising around. Obviously that changes at wide open throttle. We'll get into that in a minute. Same for race gas. It's gonna idle and cruise around 13.5. Now flex fuel gets even more complicated because you can have separate Stoic points based on the percentage of ethanol in the fuel, and that gets into a whole different ball game. And so on my car, I learned that as the ethanol content increased, so if it's 0, I see like 14.5 on the gauge. If I'm at, you know, let's say 40% ethanol, I think it's in the 12 range, and this is all cruising again in idle. 60% in the high 11s, and then fully 85, obviously it's back in the 9.5, 9.7 range again. So that's all for Stoic. And like I said, I've reprogrammed this car to run Stoic as if it's got the right fuel in the tank. So 9.85 for E85, 13.85 if I'm on 93, etc., etc. Now you get into what we want to talk about, power enrichment. So that's when you're wide open throttle, and what should you see then? Well, that's where things get a little janky and it gets a little bit confusing. And I get a lot of my content ideas from hellcatforum.org. There's some pretty knowledgeable people over there. There's great technical discussion about these cars, and some of the questions that come up over there that we talk about, I decided to make content on because they're good content. So somebody asked about what their air-fuel ratio gauge in their car should read in various circumstances, whether it was cruising around or wide open throttle. So now, we talked about Stoic, which is cruise and idle. Let's talk about wide open throttle for just a second. So at that point, you want to be in what's called power enrichment. And Stoic is where you get the most complete combustion, but that's not where you're going to make the most power. Where you're going to make the most power is something richer than that. So it means more fuel gets added, and so that ratio changes. For gasoline on a boosted car, like with a supercharger like this one, that spot is about 11.5, let's say 11.5, maybe 11.8 on the leaner end of that, and that's still a ratio. It's 11.5 parts of air to 1 part of fuel. So as you can see, on gasoline, Stoic is 14.7, so more air. Now you're talking about less air to that ratio of fuel, so you're getting power enrichment at that point. E85, the power point's around 7.9, maybe 8.0, and it's a multiplier of Stoic, so it's a percentage of Stoic. So I'm trying to think how to explain this. The easiest way to think of it, and Mike taught me this, Mike from OST Dyno, especially when you're talking about fuels other than gasoline, is start to think in lambda. So lambda 1 is stoic, always, for all fuels. 1, doesn't matter if it's LPG, doesn't matter if it's methanol, ethanol, gasoline. A lambda of 1 is stoic. Anything more than 1 is lean. It doesn't mean lean like dangerous lean like you might be thinking about. It just means it's not stoic anymore. You're getting more air than is the stoic point for the fuel. Anything less than 1 is richer. So now you're in power enrichment. And so when you start thinking in terms of lambda, it makes things a lot easier, because if we can make these gauges read lambda, and surprisingly, like I mentioned before, the gauge, the air-fuel ratio gauge in the Hellcat is showing you air-fuel ratio, and it's even labeled air-fuel ratio, but the little symbol in the middle of it is lambda. If we could somehow have a little switch or something in the computer, we could switch that to lambda, all this would probably not be confusing at all, because we would know cruising around, whether we had E85 in the tank or 93, it's going to read around 1, 0.97, 0.99, something like that. At wide open throttle, we want to be in power enrichment for lambda, like on gasoline, it's like 0.83. So 0.83 lambda is about 11.5 air-fuel ratio. And the way you get that is you take 0.83 and you multiply it times your stoic point, which in the Hellcat is 13.85. You end up around 11.5, right? Or close. On E85, we shoot a little bit richer than that, and that's to take advantage of the cooling properties of the E85 fuel with the alcohol in there. So now we're talking about 0.81, 0.80, somewhere right around in there. And it's 0.81 times 9.85, and that gives you your around 7.9, 7.8, something like that is what you would see on your air-fuel ratio gauge. So hopefully that's clear as mud. I know it's super confusing. It took me a while to start to kind of understand it. I had to kind of write it down and look at it for a minute and think, okay, if I'm looking at air-fuel ratio, it looks like this. If I'm looking at air-fuel ratio for gas, it's that. If it's E85, it's something different. And then I was like, oh, lambda. And Michael's like, yeah, start thinking about it in lambda, and it's 1, more than 1, or less than 1, and then it's much more simple. So hopefully that helps you guys out a little bit with understanding how some of this stuff works. I pulled over to check the data log, picked me a nice shady spot, and I lucked out. I'm actually getting to watch some of the Thunderbirds air show that's going on today, so very cool. So I pulled over and took a look at the data log, and I didn't review it like super thorough because I'm just pulled over in a parking lot, but what I was specifically looking for were how the fuel trims were impacted by this different fuel. Even though it's still E85, I was curious if the difference between the two would cause the car to read it differently. And in case you didn't know, E85 means it's 85% ethanol, but that means there's 15% of something else. And I used to think it was just gasoline, but I've learned that at least with pump gas, that 15% is just some kind of hydrocarbon. And it doesn't necessarily have to be gasoline specifically. It can be anything else. I have found a local brand that I really like for E85. Anytime I've tested a sample of it, it's crystal clear like water, and it smells like moonshine. If you're testing your ethanol and it looks like that, you're probably okay. I've tested some, and I'll link to the top if you missed it, that were a little bit more dingy, a little bit more grainy looking, kind of cloudy, and I didn't want to really run those in the car because I wasn't sure. It was obvious there was a difference, and I'm assuming it's what that extra 15% is. Well, with the race E85, you're guaranteed it's 85% ethanol, number one, and number two, they use a race base as the other 15%. So a race fuel base fuel, and I'm not going to call it gasoline because I don't know exactly what it is, but it's a high quality product, and I know when I put it in the car for maximum performance, I'm going to be good to go. Now, the way I checked it was I looked at the fuel trims, and basically fuel trims are measured in a percentage, and it's how much the car is having to adjust the injectors based on what the commanded fueling is. So for example, it's how the manufacturers and how the car can handle different elevations and different weather conditions without having any trouble. And it can adjust up to, I think, about 25%, maybe 30% in the factory tune. But if it gets outside of about 15%, you can throw a check engine light for the trims being too far off. So you want to try to dial them in, especially on a custom tune, as close to zero as you can get them for your area. Now, they're never going to be zero. They're always going to move around a little bit. Mine on E85, on the pump gas E85 pump fuel, I had them dialed in to about plus or minus 2 or 3%, which is really good. I put the race E85, the Renegade Pro E85 in the car, drove it around a little while to give it time to get through the fuel rails and get mixed in good and everything, and then I ran a data log and double checked it, and those fuel trims haven't moved around at all. They're still within plus or minus 2 or 3%, so that tells me that that fuel is reacting the exact same way in the car. I made a quick wide open throttle hit. That is spicy. Just to double check that area of the injector pulse width as well. The wide open throttle area is different from the cruise area, obviously, and it lined up exactly like I want it to as well. On my tune, wide open throttle, I always want the fuel trims to be just barely negative. The wide open throttle areas are a little bit easier to tune because it's one area of the injector pulse width table, and I like it to always be pulling out just a little bit of fuel, like 2 or 3, 4%. I never want it to be adding fuel because that's when I'm asking the most of the engine, and I just feel like it's a little bit safer to have it taking a little bit of fuel out, not too much, just a little bit, to keep things on the happy side. Double check that too, and that all matches up as well. So we're good to go to run this Pro E85 in the car at the track without any tune changes. Now, race tune, I'll probably do a few things differently. I might have the shifts a little bit more firm. I might tweak a couple of other little super secret things that I can't give away all my secrets, but a couple of other things I might do that get maximum effort out of the car on the track. But, and I'll show you some of these pictures of how these logs look so that you can kind of see what I was looking for, may help you about the fuel trim. So there you go. You can see that cruising around, they're still right around zero with the Pro E85 on it. And here we go, wide open throttle, same deal, just a little bit negative. So I'm going to say we're good to go on that. It makes me feel much more comfortable that now I can tune on the pump E85. It's easy to get, you know, $2 a gallon or whatever. I can save my Renegade Pro E85 for the track and know that I can just pour it in, put my E85 tune in the car, and go to town at the track. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a thumbs up if you did. Don't forget to subscribe so you catch future content. Check us out on Instagram. It's at Speedys_garage, as well as the website, www.speedysgarage.net. And hopefully, I will see you out there.